Hello, everybody. Welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement. Today is a special episode. We call it a jam session. Unfortunately, we don't have Natasha, our pro CPO, or Zach, our procurement expert of everything from London. Instead, today we've got our second edition with my good friend Ash Hall, who's been in procurement for, like me, since the time of the dinosaurs. We're doing our first in-office, in-studio podcast. It's really great. Welcome, Ashley. It's great to have you here with us.
Thanks, Conrad.
Real treat. I guess you're up here bringing your daughters up to school and getting them set up for the school year.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, very, very cool. We have this tradition in, I guess, being in procurement of meeting people that didn't really go to school for procurement. They kind of fell into procurement. Tell us a little bit about how did you find your way to procurement? What was your journey?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Definitely wasn't part of my plan. I didn't even consider that as a career option. I always thought I'd be an attorney. My father was an attorney or is an attorney still. And so I figured for undergraduate, I just studied what I wanted to do because to go to law school, you have to have some sort of degree. And so I started off as a music major. I took 2 years off, lived in Brazil. I was a missionary down there. So I learned Portuguese. So when I got back, I loved the humanities. So I decided to add a double major and focus on Portuguese literature, keep up the language skills with the intention of going to law school. I did get admitted to law school. And I remember just preparing myself mentally for what I was going to get into. And I don't think my father intended to do it, but after telling me how difficult it was going to be, he said, hey, if you aren't really sure that that's what you want to do, you might want to consider doing maybe a management degree first and then decide if you want to go to law school.
Yeah.
And so that kind of got stuck in my head and I couldn't get it out of my head. So I thought, I think I'll do that. And so I ended up getting an MBA. And I think the only reason I was admitted to the MBA program was, without work experience, was the fact that I had such a diverse background, a music major and a humanities major, because I certainly wouldn't have admitted myself to an MBA program. And I really enjoyed that. There's a lot of correlation. You'll usually find that engineers, mathematicians usually are good with music, can be good at music. But there's I don't know if this is true or not, but I've been told that if you look at words, the roots of the word music and math is the same in Greek. I don't know if that's true or not.
It's interesting. We'll have to look it up.
Look that up, right? So
it wouldn't surprise me though, because music has so much in fact, I think it was you that was telling me just about the structure of a song and how it has these repeating kind of phraseology in it from the beginning to the middle to the end. And yeah, it's very structured.
Very structured, very, a lot, you find patterns, that sort of thing. So anyway, so I did well in the GMAT, got admitted to MBA school, and I really enjoyed MBA school. And then when it was time to interview for internships, I thought, man, there's no way I'm going to get an internship. And I was lucky enough to get on a few of the interview lists. And one of those companies was Intel. And I remember the recruiter, I sat down for the interview and he's like, music. It's like, what?
Was this Don Harkey, our good buddy?
No, it wasn't Harkey. A guy named Craig Fruhan.
Oh, even better.
Yeah, great guy. So Craig, I haven't spoken to you in a long time, but I hope you're doing well. But, he said, so let me get this straight. You graduate with music, you're looking for a job, so you're getting an MBA. And I'm like, yeah, that's about it. That's about it. Because I wasn't good enough as a musician to make it as a musician. But so anyway, in the interview, he's like, what do you possibly know about procurement? And I'd played in bands since high school, and at the time in college, I was playing in a band. And so for some reason, I thought I'd just talk about that experience. And this was long before the days where you could make your own CDs. We used to make cassette tapes. And so I was a guy in the band that would be in charge of mass producing our cassettes so we could sell them at shows and at the little shops and such. And so I talked about, how I do the analysis and try to buy in bulk and that sort of thing. And so just live examples, nothing earth shattering, but he thought it was sufficient enough. He thought, hey, let's just give this guy a chance, right? And so I was lucky enough to get an internship with Intel. I had no idea what the job was going to be. It was part of purchasing, but at that time at Intel, they had a travel department that was owned by the procurement department. They stuck me in there for an internship, and the whole internship had nothing to do with procurement. It was all about safety because we had travelers that had been kidnapped and assaulted and all sorts of things. And they wanted to take care of the traveler. And so the internet was brand new. And I thought, well, let's do this on the internet. We'll do a website for our travelers. I remember my first management review committee where they said, no, you can't use the internet because not everyone has access to the internet within the company. And I thought, oh, that's kind of strange. This is like 1996. And, but after some review, they said, no, we approve this. We think it's time that everyone at Intel starts having access to the internet. And you started seeing other websites getting popped up. And I did get some exposure. I remember that Intel used to do some publications and they listed my website along with some other websites. And so anyway,
I hadn't connected the dots on that. I was building procurement websites. You were building travel websites.
Yeah, exactly.
About the same time.
So they gave me a job offer. And so I went back to school and then came back to Intel, and they put me in a purchasing role, a senior buyer. And then they said, hey, but you've got internet experience. And that's when I first met you. Hey, you got to meet this guy named Conrad Smith, who I remember you're in I get him confused, C10 or C11. It's the one that is west of the main campus on.
I don't know. Maybe C11. I don't remember I don't remember the numbers either.
But you're there cranking out stuff in Cold Fusion and all this stuff. So your skills were much better than mine. I had HTML for dummies, where you had to hard code everything. But so anyway, I kind of fell into it, and I enjoyed becoming a buyer, learning to negotiate, learning the importance of data to do analysis and understand what we were spending our money on and with whom we were spending our money. And then we spoke briefly about this. I think you'd forgotten a little about this project, but as you continue to get promoted, you had an idea of building a procurement toolbox, purchasing toolbox.
Yeah.
And so I worked with you for, I don't know if it was 3 to 6 months, where we built this website, and basically it was kind of a how-to guide of how to do a purchasing job.
Self-service, like early self-service stuff. Yeah,
exactly. So here's the process, but here's templates you could use. At the time, this was pre-SAP. We were using a tool called Rapid, but here's some queries that you can run. And I wrote some macros. You could take the data out of these queries, throw them in the macro, and it would crank stuff up.
You're giving me PTSD now.
Yeah. So anyway, I fell into procurement, but also fell in love with the system stuff as well.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I ended up. Procurement.
I just love. I love the idea of people. I have a biochemistry degree, which whenever I talk to people about what I'm doing now, having a biochemistry degree, it seems like it's from a different planet or something. But I think the diversity of education and thoughts and experience and upbringing and all the other kinds of diversity that layer in there as well, I think it's super helpful. And so many aspects of procurement there are the math and the data elements, the analysis, but so much of it is relationship and connecting with people, and there's people of all different types out there, right, that we need to connect with. So I think it's super helpful for I don't know, to have that diversity on the team and to bring that diversity and to kind of show up as ourselves. Like I don't think that there is an ideal personality to be a procurement leader or a buyer, right? I mean, there are personality traits, but I think most of them that I've come to believe over the years, I'm curious if you agree, relate to EQ and relationships more so than some of these harder skills.
I would agree with that, because I remember when I first joined, they set me up with buyers, go sit in on these negotiations, or here's a mentor. And a lot of those folks were really hardcore. Like, you look at them and they were, aggressive, and here's how we do negotiations and such. But most of those folks are no longer in procurement nowadays, right? And I remember one, he's actually a really good friend of mine, but he was so good, but so aggressive. I remember after negotiation, his company called our manager complaining about him, saying, "Hey, he went a little too far, right? And just a little too aggressive, and wasn't working on building that relationship. How do we make this kind of a win-win for both of us?" It was, "Hey, one of us is going to win, the other is going to lose," and that's not a recipe for longevity.
Yeah.
And I remember in those commodities, and we spoke about this on the last podcast, I found myself at one point doing what I thought was a really good bid, with some services we wanted, but nobody wanted to bid on the business. They had just been burned too much and there was no relationship there. And they said, "Hey, we'd just rather no bid. We'd just rather
this is tragic.
Not have your business."
Yeah, that's tragic. We recorded with Natasha and Zach last week, and we talked about RFPs and how they need to be rethought and re-engineered, for some of these same reasons, right? Being better for the suppliers, I think, or more attuned to the supplier and what they need in the relationship than just, the big hard hammer. And I learned, I was at Intel and at the time, and even now being a supplier at Intel is like, it's not a gravy train, but it's like suppliers would die to have an opportunity to provide goods and services to a large organization like that. And I just remember, how easy it was to have that, like, we're the big gorilla in this thing, like, give us what we want, give us another 10 or 15 or 20% or whatever, without that mature mindset and thinking around the supplier. You came to Intel on your internship and then you worked there for quite a while. I always feel like I worked at Intel for too long. I was there like 15 years. MBA school, they always said 5 years in job and move. Like, that's the best way to optimize your career. I kind of wish I had listened to them and remembered that. But Intel and so many other companies are just amazing at convincing us that it's the only place, right? Like, and it was like Intel, like the compensation, the team, the intelligence and capability of the team members. Like, it was this awesome place to learn and grow. I just loved it. But anyway, you were at Intel for how many years? And then you went through a number of other companies. I kind of watched your progression through that. So how did you think about the departure from Intel and making these other career changes? Because I know a lot of people listening to the podcast are, mid in their career, or early in their career, and trying to figure out how should I do this? Or do I find that next great job? What's your advice in thinking about managing those significant changes in your career?
Yeah, no, that's good. I was there a little more than just shy of 11 years. So I also think I stayed a bit too long. Great company, loved it. My motivation for leaving, by the way, is my last role, I was managing third-party logistics. And so that was kind of a buzzword out there. So I was speaking a lot at conferences, so that got me quite a bit of exposure. So I kept getting calls from headhunters, and then I remember my wife saying, Intel stock's not doing anything. And you'll remember, right? People weren't retiring because stock wasn't going anywhere, and it was a difficult place to be. To
stagnated people a bit.
Yeah, to grow. So I started talking to some of those headhunters, and so I left. I went with a company called Danaher, which is a great company, really known for processes. Intel was really good at processes. They're known for copy exact, that sort of thing. But Danaher, they take this Danaher business solution based on Toyota, and they're really known for that. So that seems like...
Is it a Toyota company?
No, it's not. But they modeled the Danaher business system. It was heavily influenced by the Toyota production system. But Danaher has since split into different companies, but it's really well run. It hit its glory days under Larry Culp, who's now the CEO of General Electric. So it was an exciting time. So that was my first time choosing to leave, and went to Danaher. Enjoyed my time there. They did look after my career and noticed that all my focus had been on indirect procurement, logistics, and systems. And they said, look, to round out your supply chain experience, you need to go do a rotation. You need to manage supply chain at a factory, be responsible for inventory and planning and all that. And so they let me pick a location. And I remember I was on a trip that, I could pick New York, Massachusetts, or California, pick California because that's where my wife grew up. That happened to be an aerospace business. And so I'd already been at Danaher for 2 or 3 years when I went on that rotation. 6 months into that rotation, they decided to sell that aerospace business that I'd gone to. And so they sold that to Meggitt. So I switched companies again. So it wasn't by design. It wasn't a choice. It's just
kind of happened.
Yeah. We've sold the division. Everybody goes. I'm like, well, I'm in the middle of a rotation. They're like, yeah, but it could work out fine. It actually did work out really well for me. Meggitt, hopefully I said Meggitt.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because the next time was called Mercury, and so I get them confused sometimes. But Meggitt, great UK-based company. They really appreciated the processes from Danaher. And so I quickly found myself originally I was offered a corporate job, and then it came back and it was what I thought even a better job to lead supply chain for the largest division there. So it was really good exposure in the aerospace defense part of the business. They asked me to go to the UK for a couple of years to lead a transformation.
So cool.
Yeah, it was a great experience. That was for one of their few non-aerospace businesses. It was an oil and gas business. They do heat exchangers for offshore drilling. And that was a fun experience. So I kind of got out of supply chain because I was leading a transformation for the entire business.
Yeah.
My team had reps from engineering, finance, HR, programs, just basically every function. And how are we going to grow this business? And the business had gone through a lot of growth. It's just how do we keep up with this growth? And then when that was over, then they asked me to be the CPO for that business. As an interim basis till they found somebody. They brought somebody else on and didn't work out, so they asked me again to step in as the CPO. And at that point, I'd relocated back to the U.S. But that was a great opportunity. So most of my career, was spent with Intel, Danaher, and Meggitt, but I'd only chosen to leave once, and that was leaving Intel. Now, the head of operations for Meggitt had left that company and gone to a small defense company called Mercury Systems. So he recruited me to come work for him. So I did that for about 4 years, and that was a great experience. It was a lot smaller company. So I started with Intel, huge spend. Danaher was a bit smaller than Intel, but then Meggitt was much smaller, and then this Mercury Systems was a heck of a lot smaller. It was a great opportunity because they were building a procurement function from scratch. So they had acquired a bunch of businesses, and they said, "Okay, we need to act like one company." So that was a great experience, and that led to my next role with Lincoln Electric, which was a bigger company around just shy of a $5 billion company, where they wanted to, take all of the division, all the geographies, and pull it into a structured global procurement. And so that's how I ended up there. So my resume is different companies, but I haven't left too many jobs. But
yeah. So you're saying maybe not like a upfront game plan to map the whole thing out. It was a bit more situational and opportunistic as things presented themselves, which I think, by the way, is awesome. I think when somebody's working hard and doing good work, like you were at Intel when the headhunters called, opportunities present themselves, and you just kind of got to figure out which of those are going to make the most sense. Many people, I think, navigate most of their career without hunting for a job. Like the job comes to them instead of them going to the job. I also, I'm thinking about, my experience of what you're describing when you're at a large organization. So those of you that are currently at a large organization or thinking about a large organization, you are really specialized in something, right? Like you have a very narrow category that you're managing, or your role is really generally, particularly when you're getting started or middle of your career, it's just so focused and so narrow and really deep. And then you get into these smaller businesses and it goes very broad. Like now maybe your category assignment is like 6 categories that before would have been teams and teams of people. And now it's like you have that whole scope. So the learning and the exposure and the experience, right, is totally different in this different size of company. Yeah. I found it really refreshing. When I left Intel, I went to Omniture, and I was like the head of procurement, which was the head of myself.
Yeah.
Like it was a one person team. I think we brought in another buyer that was embedded in the business, but it kind of changed things, right? Because at Intel, we were making decisions by committee, and then, I get to Omniture, and it was decisions with a little bit of input and quick action, and it's such a totally different experience. What a cool journey to go through. In the last month, couple of weeks to a month, I have probably talked to 3 or 4 people that are new in a procurement role like you're describing, and they're trying to figure out what their 90-day plan is. Like, how do I approach this new job? Some of them have done it before, but many people listening today they'll be in that same situation. Like, either new in a company, maybe you're a leader, maybe you're a mega leader, a smaller contributor. Hey, I'm new here. What do I do? As you move to these jobs, how did you think about approaching the new job so that you could show up well, build your credibility in the organization and your value and your impact?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good question. It can be quite overwhelming. When I was at Megit, right, it was, they had a head of global procurement, and it was a good team, right? But there were still a lot of opportunities to get that to work as a more cohesive team. Like, there wasn't a single set of KPIs, for example, for the company. There were 25 plus ERP systems that didn't talk to each other, right? So a lot of things like that. One of the things I was concerned about was, how do we develop our people and talent? And so there were a lot of things we had to go figure out and standardize. And so, to me, I call that my first big transformation of a company. Even though it existed, it was just taking it to that next step and just kind of building on the shoulders of great leaders that had been there before. But when I left Megit, went to Mercury Systems, it was a blank slate. It's like, you got to start over. So I just had this idea. It's like, it was the 90-day. What am I going to do in 90 days? And I just boiled it down, and it's not rocket science. To me, it's about people, process, and systems, right? Become overwhelming. There's so many things that you got to do. There's risk management. There's government compliance, right? There's, you got to save money, right? You got to come up with strategic sourcing plans. You got all these things you got to do. And can literally overwhelm somebody. But if you can simply look and say, let's focus, we're going to look at people, process, systems, then you can compartmentalize those. So what I did there, and I use the same recipe at Lincoln Electric, was an assessment. So I took 90 days saying, we will do some stuff. I can't sit for 3 months and do nothing. But the priority is to do this assessment. And so on the people side, that was twofold. The first one was, let's assess the people. How strong of a team do we have? Yeah. And I struggled for years on finding a very objective way to go and look at companies. So I'm going to give a shout out to a company in the UK called Source Exchange, where in the UK, they've got something called CIPS, so Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply Chain, where they've outlined 13 competencies that a procurement professional should be able to demonstrate. Yeah. And so what this company, Source Exchange, has done, they've come up with an assessment covering those 13 areas. And so it's a very objective.
Is it like a test or something?
Yeah, it's like a test, like taking the SAT. So
that sounds fun.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Before, when you do those assessments, like, I'm really good at negotiating. I'm good at this. And then your manager, you self-assess, and your manager looks at it and say, I agree or I disagree. Yeah. That's okay, but it's not.
There's a lot of bias built into that, for sure.
Exactly. So you go through this assessment. I first rolled this out at Megit, but then we did it at Mercury Systems, and then again at Lincoln. And I did the assessment along with everybody else, because people freak out. Oh no, there's a new leader here. I'm being tested. Am I going to lose my job? And so the communication was very important, telling everybody, look, we can all learn. This is not to weed people out or anything. It's to identify what's your jumping off point, where are your areas of development, and this is going to become your personalized development plan.
For people that might want to use this, is there a cost associated with using it?
Yeah.
Manageable, I'm assuming?
It's manageable. I know we're a heck of a negotiator, so I won't say the price, but it's very manageable. It will fit within your budget.
And how long, if I go to take this test, how long would it take me tomorrow?
It'd take about well, they could get you set up. As far as the company goes, they just want a list of who needs to be assessed, what country they're in, what language.
But I started the test. Is this like a 2-hour test?
Okay. Yeah, I tell
so this is pretty that's a robust test.
Yeah. So 13 categories. There's either 6 or 9 questions.
Is it essay or like multiple choice?
It's all multiple choice.
Okay.
All multiple choice.
Deep calculator work, like
not really. No, but it's more of is assessing, do you understand these terms? But you wouldn't do math or thing. There might be some, like one of the competencies is financial acumen. So they might ask you about some of the key financial ratios and those sorts of things you need.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So anyway, it's great. We've looked, there's been some level of competition in the U.S. It's been growing, but it hasn't met at the standard that we're at.
But you brought your U.S. team through that, it sounds like.
Yeah, I brought the U.S. team, and it's fine. I did this, with Mercury Systems, it was Department of Defense work, but we can still use this UK company for that. Yeah. So, and I did the assessment, and I shared my 3 lowest scores with everybody. And I did that Lincoln as well, just to say, I'm in this with everybody else, right?
We all need to learn.
We all need to learn. And so anyway, so that was that part. And so everyone ends with a individualized development plan, and they've got e-learning and such, but we'd also use that data to come up with where are the shared learnings, and that would drive what are the courses we're going to bring live instructors to go to.
And this company they support the curriculum to lift the skill level for everybody across those areas. That's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the second part of the people part is the organization. How are we organized, and is it optimal for what we're trying to do? And I've learned early in my career, one size doesn't fit all, right? So the organizational structure at Intel wouldn't work out of the box at Danaher. What we did at Danaher wouldn't work out of the box.
Forget cutting and pasting, like that's going to solve the problem.
But yeah, exactly. So that's part of the assessment, and so you just got to look and understand why we're there. And I apologize to people who have heard me say this before, but I always thought, there's an old cowboy proverb: "Don't tear down a fence till you know why it was set up." So understand why that org is there. Don't go start changing org just because it's fun, but you need to understand why that organization's there, and then assessing those organizations, how effective are they or not.
It isn't like, or sorry, I'm going to just interject here. What I found is that because there's this constant, in my mind at least, push and pull between organizing by category or organizing by businesses that you support.
Yeah.
And as many ways as I've tried to set up an org chart, I always find that no matter which model you have, some of them have pros. Each of them have pros and cons. Like there's a shortcoming to being organized in one way or any other way. And it's just so important to understand okay, we decided to be organized this way, or we're going to continue to be organized this way. What are the natural negative consequences of being this way? And how do we build in sort of mitigations to those consequences? There's no perfect org chart, even for a company, right? It's going to be the best you can do and then work around to make it better.
Yeah, absolutely. And another key input for that is, what is a corporate strategy? So where's the company trying to go? Because that will impact that too. Yeah. So like when we went to Mercury Systems, that company had grown very quickly from a bunch of smaller acquisitions, right? And it was Department of Defense work, but individually these companies would fly under the radar for a lot of the audits that they would need to do. But all of a sudden the company was approaching $1 billion mark. We were going to start getting audited by the U.S. government on these projects. And if you mess up on those audits, they aren't very forgiving, right? So that changed our perspective. So for that one, we said, and it's not my ideal model, but we said, we've got to centralize this whole thing because we don't have time to spend a year or 2 or 3 to convince people this is the way that things should work. We got to do a top-down approach saying, thou shalt do this and as it matures, again, the pendulum swings, you can decentralize a bit later, but
you definitely need a consistent framework.
Yeah.
So are you, sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but that kind of starts talking about the process, right? You
Yeah.
kind of have the people pieces, the org structure, and then you're trying to figure out where you are from a process perspective.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And so, so again, people hit those key areas, the process, how process oriented is the company. That's usually where I start from. What has been documented? What are the policies? What are the procedures? Right. And you get the whole gamut. Lincoln Electric, really well run company, but very regionalized and departmentalized. So we would have several different policies or processes on doing the same thing, right? Here's how you do, create a PO, but there's 20 different ways across the company, ways of doing it across the company. No, we got to standardize and get that in one place. So the first part of that assessment is, how process oriented are we? Is it documented? And then you go through and what's best in class, what's not. You quickly, and you can start looking at the results to see who's performing better than others, and those become your drivers. And then the last part is the systems, right? You got to have the data for your analytics. You got to have the systems that help you do the work. Systems help drive your processes and policies. Systems, to me, they don't fix the problem, but they are huge facilitators, right? They're huge enablers, right? And so what should the process be? How do we standardize? And then how do we pick the right systems and make sure that we're doing things the correct way? So I find, going through the people process system, you get a pretty good overview. And then from there, we could flag the gaps and what are the priorities that we're going to go hit. And then that, I was able to build 3 to 5 year roadmaps based on that initial assessment. So this stuff we got is critical. It's got to be done right away. Here's stuff we plan on doing in the first year. After the, year 2, here's what we plan on doing. And then you can see that progression. But by year 5, here's where we expect to be.
So you're coming out of the 90-day plan with an assessment, understanding about people, process, and systems or technology, and as well as a roadmap of what the company priorities are and how that's reflected into the group, like within your first 90 days. That's awesome. Now, I have this memory from a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago about a mission coin that you created. That'd be awesome if you could share that story.
Oh, yeah. So I took this when I started working in the aerospace, mainly on the defense side. So this is really common in the US, right? So in the military, if you're on certain missions, they'll give you a coin, right? To commemorate that, hey, I was part of this mission.
Launch to the moon or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times what the government will do, they'll recognize the non-military people that contributed to that. So what you'll find is some defense companies, they'll take their initiative that helped with something and they'll do a coin and they'll say, hey, congratulations, you were part of this. And so to have everybody be part of the big vision, we do these coins. And so I've done these at my last 2 companies. So one side, it states clearly what our mission is, right? And I like to keep these mission statements very simple so people can repeat them. So I won't totally give it out exactly what it says, but the elements for procurement, right, to me is you got to get quality products and services, right? They got to be on time so people can rely on it. It's because the factories need their part on time and they need to know it's going to work. And they need it at an optimal price. Doesn't mean always the cheapest because you get what you pay for sometimes. And then over the years, I've summarized the final part with the right way, meaning we're following, if it's a regulated industry like Department of Defense, we're following those regulations, right? Or if it's not, if it's just purely commercial, there's still a right way to do things. So that's the standardization, that's doing the best thing. So you got that vision statement. And
so you're kind of holding your hand like this is like a 2 or 3 inch coin. It's not like it's not like a quarter or something.
Yeah, no, it's a little substantial. Yeah, it's like inch and a half, 2 inches, and they look nice, right? You spend a little on these things, and but then my first company, what we do is we would give these as awards to people as well. So when we do our town halls every quarter, whoever got recognized, they get a coin. And so it's fun seeing people stack these up or get a little stand and have those. So it's like a little trophy, and it's smaller than a plaque. And
you gave one to everybody in the beginning, and then you'd add to their stack based on recognition.
Exactly. Yeah, give everyone at the beginning, because we're all part of the team, right? And it's kind of like your little badge. And then we'd share these with internal customers as well, like the marketing department, the engineering department, whoever we're working with on different initiatives. Hey, thanks for being a great partner. And so so it's a fun idea. Stole it from other people, but
the best
fun.
Ideas come from somewhere else most of the time. I mean, it's it is hard to have like that absolutely perfectly unique idea that nobody's ever thought about. So kind of steal with pride and take advantage of that. I love it. Now I'm kind of thinking how to create a graphite coin that we could share across the company. That'd be very cool. I know some of our listeners and me personally, this question has come up on different podcasts as well. When you're looking at the technology and systems decisions that you're making in that first 90 days, I mean, you have in your procurement tech stack, you have spend analytics as a need, you have contracts, you have maybe e-sourcing tools, you have transaction tools, P2P, or so this whole stack of things that you can go invest in. There's the umbrella question of suite versus best of breed that always seems to kind of pendulum back and forth and create issues and problems on either side. Again, I don't think there's a perfect answer. You have to mitigate. But how do you think about where do you prioritize in the technology stack as you go in? And my guess is it's a different answer in different companies, but how do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's good. I would put it in. It's hard for me to think of I'll tell you what the top two are, and it's arguable which is
more important.
You got to have data, right? I mean, to do a procurement job, you've got to have the data. So the spend analytics is absolutely critical, but you also have to have a system that enables your process, right? And so when I talk about some of these acquisitions I've had to deal with, I'm talking companies that were literally working off spreadsheets, like no ERP system at all, right? So in that case, if there's absolutely no ERP, that becomes a priority. We got to get you on something. If they're on an ERP, I've worked enough with other partners where we can get that data and pull that into, the terms always change, and we call them data lakes or what have you, BI thing. But we can get that data mapped where we can get that analytics. So if someone's doing stuff off spreadsheets, and it does happen, trust me, because I've acquired enough of these businesses. Yeah. You got to get them something. But the answer is not always SAP. That transformation program I did in the UK business-wide, there was no ERP system, literally off of spreadsheets. And had we gone, and the company had done a good job making SAP kind of like the goal, even though they had 25 instances of ERP, they were shooting for like a default of let's go SAP. But SAP would have killed that company, right? And so we found a small local UK company who's actually called Access. I don't know how they won that copyright name with Microsoft Access, but it has nothing to do with Microsoft. But it was a nice tool, fit for purpose. They did a lot of project-based work that would work for them, but we had to get them on something. But so that helped enable the process. They could do the order intakes, right? We could generate MRP. We could do the purchase orders.
It sounds like you're talking about access to data and supporting the transactions. Those are the two foundation elements of the pyramid, and then you build up from there.
And then the ones that get me excited, obviously, I worked for you at Intel as we rolled out Ariba, and then SAP's version of Ariba, and then SAP went and bought Ariba, and I cried for days after all that hard work. But
Ariba was hard to use before SAP bought them, and then it got harder to use, right? So I think they're making some progress now, but I don't know. I don't want to trash on any systems, but it is hard. I would just say it's hard on the technology side for any of these technologies to stay relevant over decades, right? Because they get bigger, they get acquired by big companies, they get slower at innovation, and then these small companies like Graphite or anybody else come in and with these really cool modern approaches to getting things done.
Yeah, exactly. So those things are great, but those are the hard sells, right? Like a source to pay system or a procure to pay system. It gets very, very difficult, very expensive. I failed at Megit getting that sold. We did launch an indirect transformation project, and I remember we're sitting in the conference room in London with a consultant that we had hired to help us, and I get the call saying meeting's over, budget's been pulled, and I understand it was a business reason. It needed to happen.
So the failure, you mean, was just convincing leadership that there's a big enough value to justify the investment.
So I convinced them to the point when all of a sudden things got really tough. They just pulled the plug literally the day of the kickoff. But in my last company, Lincoln, they made this investment, which is great, very forward thinking. And so we got to roll out Ariba. Now, what's fun about that process is we'd done that 25 years ago, and it's amazing how much of
it's changed.
Yeah.
It's changed. Remember, you were on the Ariba team, right?
Yeah.
They had like a Java jar file that downloaded in 6 or 7 minutes. You click a button and then you would just wait for like 6 minutes. Imagine in today's world, if that was the web application experience, we wait for 6 minutes. It's more like 6 milliseconds right now that people have patience for.
Yeah, so that part is exciting. And then the other parts, which was kind of gratifying, is seeing that the actual process of the tool didn't change a ton, right? From what we first rolled out too. So, they're definitely great ideas, but it's fun to see how they evolve and how the technology gets better. But sometimes a really solid process stands the test of time. But
one of my struggles is after 30 years in procurement, back to those days, it feels like we just haven't made as much progress in procurement as I wish we could have. I mean, we've talked about all this catalog automation, and there's catalogs and it automates and it works, but it isn't like the huge vision that does everything. And then RPA was going to automate everything. And there's just cycles and expectations. And then, you look at so many companies, even big ones, really mature, very technology savvy, who are still doing things in very manual ways. The fax machine was replaced with email, and the email sharing of documents and transactions was replaced with these modern portals, which is, frankly, when you boil it down, it's kind of like an email inbox with purchase orders or invoices in different lists. And I look forward to this next wave, which, maybe I'm being too optimistic with AI about what it can do for us, but it feels like we're at a place now where maybe the level of automation that we've all been aspiring for over decades is kind of within reach. It'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out.
Yeah, it will. I've spent the past few months, talking to a lot of grad students from mainly MIT and Stanford, right? So that's where a lot of these guys are finding me for some reason. And so we're looking at what they're doing. Some are taking the product already to market, but it's pretty clever.
They're building like procurement technologies or?
Yeah. So what they're doing is they aren't replacing the procure to pay system, right? They aren't replacing the Coupa or the Ariba or what have you, but it's a front end. And it's as simple as, what would you like to do today? Right? Yeah. I need a consultant for this. And then it just knows how to navigate to the system, but all that's happening in the background, but the AI is doing that for you. So for the end user, it's just very, very simple. Yeah. And so that stuff is pretty exciting, but it's amazing. These are just graduate students, right? Come up with these ideas that are like, wow, this is pretty exciting stuff. But it's just a different world, right? The way this stuff can work, right? You don't have to necessarily do a whole new suite for it, right? You can build this on top of your existing technology. I learned that lesson long ago from Danaher, right? Danaher had a couple of, it's such a large company, right? They acquire people, but they had some big ERP rollouts that didn't go so well. A lot of companies, you read about the Hershey experience and all these other ones where, things just get shut down. And so, their focus was, we can deal with that in the system layer. Let's just why do we have the system? How do we get that data out? Right. And so for business intelligence, we use that same thought at Mega when we had 25 plus ERP systems. We had a really good partner that helped us with that. And but now it's not just the data, but it's now the front end processes where you don't have to replace the tools that you invested in. It's just an AI front end that can just interpret that, and then
it's going to be so fascinating to see how this evolves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, as you've been talking to them and you've been thinking about your own career. I know you're in a transition now from Lincoln to whatever your new adventure is going to be. When you think about AI and the beginning, I mean, we've got to be in the early innings of AI and AI and procurement. But how do you think about, how would you predict that AI will impact a procurement, buyer, category manager, leader's role over time? Like, is this just an augmentation of everybody? What does it change the skills that we need to be like building in ourselves or in our hiring plan? Like, how are you thinking about AI right now?
So that's a good question. I'll use a non-business example of how AI just scares the crap out of me, right? So on the music side, I've been playing in a band, right, with a buddy of mine from high school forever. He takes a song from our last album that he wrote. He did a great job. He's an excellent songwriter. He threw the song through AI and said, do something with this. It totally redid all the instrumentation, came up with a different voice, spectacular voice. I prefer my friend's voice better because it's more real, right? But it's like, it was crazy. And I mean, it was good. It was professional, right? And then you hear that AI is actually even writing songs now and doing all that. And so as a creator, it almost zapped my will. Like I remember telling my wife, maybe I'm not going to write anymore. Yeah. Maybe those days are over, right? It's just, why now? I'll do it because it does something to my soul, right? Yeah. I got to, I got to
self-actualization.
Right. And then I've got my daughter who's studying accounting. She's in the master's program for accounting. And she had a professor that told her, most of your jobs are going to go away because of AI. Right.
After spending tens of thousands of dollars and all these years.
So she's down on this. And then I'm in a meeting the other day at work, and someone with all good intentions, we had an issue with the specialty packaging supplier, said, oh, AI just gave me these suppliers. So go.
Let's use these ones.
And then I thought, I'm not giving up, because there's more to it than just, these people can package. So AI is not ready to replace people yet. But so here's why I see AI. It's what I've encouraged my people to do ever since I've been a manager is I want them to think. I want AI to take all that administrivia, all that stuff that could be automated out of the way. So, I was anticipating you're going to talk about this. So I was thinking one thing, I think AI, the analytics are going to be fantastic, right? I'm already starting to see some of that, but go scrub this data, clean this data. That's something that's good. It's not going to make a decision for me, but it's going to give enough data to where the professional is now more empowered to make better decisions, right? Because AI still can't think.
Yeah.
So right?
I agree with what you're saying. I am a little bit worried, and I'm a bit skeptical about AI cleaning up the data kind of on itself. I know I can clean my kitchen with a dirty rag, but at the end of the day, it's only going to be as clean as my dirty rag, and I rinse it out. I mean, there's a level of cleanliness that you don't get to when you're kind of working with the average bad quality that exists in the universe or in your own system. So I agree with what you're saying, but I do think that one of the things all of us should be doing right now is taking a deep look at our data, figuring out how to clean it up. And AI can help us to some point, but we're going to look really stupid when we're making decisions on data that, that's not right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's why I'm saying, let it be a tool in that process. I'll give you a perfect example. Like, I for a long time been buying lithium,
Yeah.
right? Lithium, yeah, for my own use, right? But if you look at UNSPSC codes, lithium is listed, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure, it's listed under a medical thing, right? Because
These codes are crazy,
it's a
right?
chemical that's used for other things more than just batteries and all that, right? So AI is going to make some dumb decisions. I've seen our lithium spend get put in some funky areas, right? And so, the age old thing with, machine parts, right? Is it machining or is it a piece of metal that has been machined or whatever? And so it's, yeah, so I agree. I'm not ready to trust it, but I think it can help.
Oh, it's going to be
help
awesome.
with that
I
process.
love and believe as you do that its ability to take data that most people I meet are not data people. I mean, you gave me PTSD before when you were talking about like getting data out of Rapid, the old mainframe system. In those days, I developed like a 22-step process. So first you have to learn SQL query back in those days. You have to put it in and then you have to go through all these iterations of just getting the data out into a spreadsheet and then updating the spreadsheet and moving it around and getting to a place where you can actually do something with it. I hope there's not very many people that have to go through that kind of headache to get data today, but like all that stuff can be automated. And the stuff that's more modern that we're dealing with around the data can really like turning that stuff into a visualization, watching it, monitoring it, telling me when things change, like all of that stuff for sure. Agents, just basic AI automation and agents are going to do so many cool things for us.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Because we got to get to the point. Because again, just even my last job, like I remember me with one of our senior folks, and just basic questions like, "What are you spending on this or that?" And he was off 10x, right? And it means he just hadn't looked at the data because it's probably intimidating for him, right? And it's a mess and it's this and that. And so that's what I'm hoping comes out of this is that it becomes a good tool. It helps us move this data to a point where we can actually do something with it. But, to me, that's one of the biggest wastes, right? Untapped resources. You got this data and we don't do things with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a couple more questions.
Okay.
As you think about procurement as a function, we're often talked about as being a cost center. Some people like to say, "Oh no, we're a profit center because we're bringing savings or whatever." What do you think the biggest driver is in an organization to take, to I don't know, set the mission and the vision in a way that the organization and your delivery of that value really is recognized as value, not just overhead and back office nonsense and bottlenecks and hoops that people have to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it's really been tied to past 2 or 3 companies I've worked for. It's tied to productivity, right? So we aren't there as a transactional or a necessary evil or approval thing. It's saying we are helping with the productivity of the company, meaning
making the company more efficient.
Exactly. And so how are we increasing the margins of the company? And the last, company I was at, right, that was very clear. That's what they wanted to see. Because we went through the KPIs and how are we going to agree that we're successful as a function? And that's what they want to see is how do we increase productivity? Our role in that is improving margins. And then the other thing I always take accountability for is working capital as well. That my previous company, finance, took a big ownership, which is fine. We have co-owners, but to me, that's the part where you can show that we executed this impact to the business.
Yeah.
And so for direct, it's a lot easier, right? I spent this before. I'm building the same sorts of things, buying the same sorts of stuff. I'm spending less, Indirect's always a pain, right? It's always hard. There are some indirect things where there are some part numbers and all, but that's the more difficult thing. But the way that I've done that too, and I've been, that's just my past 3 companies. For indirect to be recognized, it's not us reporting, it's finance. So we agree with them. This is the rule book. Here's how we'd like to define it, but it's up to you. We want you to be that voice, that conscious, that voice of reason. Are we spending less than before? It gets difficult when you have your capital projects, right? Where you're spending all this money, you're going to spend this one time, you're never going to do it again. But
it's tricky. Measuring value on the indirect side of the business is absolutely tricky. Our mutual friend Don Harkey, I think it was 10 or 20 years ago, said to me, look, procurement doesn't have to exist. If you're not making the business better, like, why do you exist? And, I ended up translating that into my vision for what we always need to do in procurement, which is enable business success. And again, that's a little tricky to measure because in different organizations or categories, business success could be measured in slightly different ways. But as a shining star, I think that, it's always held water for me to kind of think about it that way. All right. So leadership, just general leadership. If you could talk to little Ashley, the guitar holding musician, bouncing into procurement for the first time, what have you learned over these 3 decades now that you would kind of look back and say, hey, this is really important. Maybe you didn't understand it well enough, or this is a big enough deal as you're starting or you're in your career. Listen to this and it will really make a difference.
Yeah. That's a good one. Well, there's a few lessons I've learned to that. First off, I like to roll up my sleeves and do things, and that's counterintuitive to being a leader. The higher up you go up the chain, and I think that's why, over the past, again, especially last 3 roles, I've gotten more into the development of people. So for me to be a good leader, it's not that I can do the job; it's that I've got an army of people that can do the job. Right. So to me, a true leader, if in your priorities, if people development isn't core to that, you're doing a disservice to those people that work for you. You're doing a disservice to the business, right? And so to me, that's key. It's really the development of the people. I mean, everyone says people are our most important asset, right? Everyone says that, but do we really mean it?
Do something about it.
Yeah, let's do something about it. And so that's something that I would say. And I still fight that need, right? The tariffs have been horrible, right? Especially the industry I came out of. And so it was easy. All right, guys, this is how we're going to do that. You roll up your sleeves. And in my last role, trade compliance actually reported into me, which was great experience for me because usually that's always been under legal or something. Yeah. But, I'd have to catch myself after a meeting. I'm like, I should have said nothing in that meeting, right? I've got a very capable trade compliance team. They should have just
give them the space to work and
let them do it because they're doing a great job. So, so I think that, it's sort of a lot of my personality into that, but it's, if you're a person like me that likes to roll up your sleeves, that you can do it. You gotta step back, train other people to do that, and trust them to do that.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's about the people, and I think it's so tempting to continue to think that your output as a leader is the same output that it was before, right? But at a certain point, your output becomes the people, right? You're developing them. Like, is your KPI like the elevation of the people's learning and growth and capability over time? How do you measure that, and how do you think about it? Where you may not hit your cost savings goal for the quarter. You might be close. You might bomb it. I don't know, but if your people aren't growing, you're not going to hit it next year, right? You're not, as the bar keeps going up, you need those people. I absolutely love that. It's really good. Okay, before we wrap up, anything else that that we didn't talk about that you think could be really really worth putting on putting on the record here.
Well, I'm sure I've gone over my time. I do talk quite a bit, but no, I think it's good. I enjoyed the conversation at the start. The first 90 days. Look, something I love transformations. I love going and fixing things, but it can be overwhelming. So I guess my advice to anyone that steps into that is make it manageable, right? And I'm not saying people, process, system is going to be the formula that's going to work for everybody, but for me, it works. It compartmentalizes it. I can bring it down, break it down. I guess the final thing I'd say with that is when we build the orgs, not doing everything, as the leader, you got to realize why you're in that role, who you're leading, and who's it for. And so the more I progress in my career, the importance of bringing value to the business has just grown more and more. And so the way I describe a corporate function is the pit car analogy. And I love that with graphite because you guys are all about Formula One or NASCAR, what have you. And, to me, a corporate function is that pit crew, right? So all that stuff we can take off of people's plates, right? Everything that bothers, that distracts them from driving and winning, that's what the corporate function is for. And so that's just a key element. And so back to that 90-day assessment, we want to make sure we got competent people who can take that burden off of people. We got the right systems who can take that burden off of people. And then we got those standard, processes.
Over the years, you've taken these other strengths and skills and abilities that are just part of who you are, that has made, you have made procurement, working with you and your leadership, you've brought all those other things to the table, which is where I think ultimately that background and that diversity really pays off. So it's awesome. Thank you, Ashley. I'm sure we'll tap on you again at some point to bring you back in here.
Yeah, great pleasure.
All right.
Thanks
Take care.